Check out the CallMeEzekiel web store for our brand new sticker sheet featuring the Italian army from World War II, and a very angry Greek ball trying to fight them. It's 20% off until December 6th. Add a hoodie to your order and you'll qualify for free shipping. Links in the description. Hey America! That sure was a great war, huh? Anyway, I want to make sure I'm getting the territory that was promised to me for joining the war. I know my front didn't go as well as we hoped, but I still fought hard and lost like 600,000 people. What's that, Serbia? Oh yes sirree, you're getting just about the whole Adriatic coast. Not an inch of it stays with Australia. Wait, what? I'm Italy. Ugh, fine. Yugoslavia. Or whatever you're calling yourself now. So that means I, Italy, am getting the Dalmatian coast as promised. Sure dude, you can have whatever dog you want. Anyway, I'm off to saw Germany in half. Come here, you little piggy! Let's see what's really inside the sausage! Oh mio Dio, I hope he was talking about me.
A few minutes later.
Oh, mamma mia! Today, Italy's role in the Second World War is viewed as nothing more than a joke. How could it merit anything else? Every Italian front ended in either defeat or German bailout. Italy's war ended in an invasion from both the Allies and then the Germans to prevent their surrender. And most discussions as to why this happened begin and end in the incompetence of Italian armies. But that doesn't answer the important questions from the debacle. Why was Italy a German ally in the first place? It's not like the Nazis had an especially positive view of Italians. And could the Italian army have really been that bad? It just won wars in Ethiopia and Spain. Important things like enemies and grand strategy are completely outside the army's control. These are exactly the questions we're going to answer today. So you can call me Ezekiel. And this is why Italy joined the Second World War and why it was a disaster. Oh boy, I'm so excited to be a tanker! Me too! Alright men, if you're going to be tankers for the Regio Esercito, you need to familiarize yourself with your tanks. This is the L3 light tank. Commandant, not to insult the designers or anything, but that looks more like a coffin. Can it even stop small arms fire? What? Of course it can! Watch! Well, that was just bad luck. Let's try this one. Oh, Commandant, can we please drive some heavier armor? There isn't any. Commandant? Yes? I don't want to be a tanker anymore. Our poor Italian tankers may be doomed to drive into battle on rolling coffins, but thanks to today's sponsor, you'll be able to drive some much heavier armor. Because this video is made possible by World of Tanks, the premier online multiplayer tank battling game for PC. And did I mention it's totally free? Take control of hundreds of tanks from every major power of World War II, including Italy. All of its vehicles are lovingly brought to life, and many are even experimental designs that never saw actual combat, but that you can try out for yourself on the digital battlefield. By using our exclusive link in the description, returning players who haven't played in the last 30 days will get all of the rewards you see on screen. New players who use our link get a free Tier 6 tank, 250,000 credits, 7 days of premium time, and 3 Tier 6 rental tanks. Remember, World of Tanks is totally free. Just use our exclusive link and you'll even get extra rewards. Please show World of Tanks lots of love, because sponsors like them are what make videos like this one possible. So let's get back to it.
Saluto alla Duce, grande condottiero di questa Italia di camicie.
Despite their victory in the Great War, Italy emerged from the conflict an embittered nation. Nearly defeated at Caporetto and snubbed at Versailles, Italy had little to show for its 650,000 dead except a Vittoria Mutilata. Mutilated victory. It's little surprise the Italians were disaffected with the post-war order as soon as it began. The nearly defeated Italy almost followed the war's actual losers into communist revolution and right-wing counter-revolution. Instead, the Italians forged a new path. The mythical political Third Way. Fascism, an ideology born out of a rebellious French left storming across the Alps like Hannibal or Napoleon. Fascism can be called many things: ultranationalist, militaristic, imperialist, and totalitarian. Despite that, its most distinguishing feature was, perhaps, just how liberal it was. In the words of R.J.B. Bosworth, in his excellent Mussolini's Italy, Life Under the Fascist Dictatorship 1915 to 1945, in striking contrast to the root and branch revolution being attempted in the interwar period in the USSR, fascist rule left much intact from the past. This regime did not assault the family. It did little to alter the existing distribution of property. It remained constitutionally a monarchy, and did its best to find accommodation with the Catholic Church. With that list of qualifications, its cultural revolution could never be more than partial. Doubtless, the dictatorship did become more radical during the 1930s, but for most of its history, its revolution was not so all-embracing as to eliminate very many of the spaces where Italians crafted their existence and identity. Neither the diplomats nor officers experienced ideological purges. They were hardly needed. But you know who might need to be purged? The more than 2/3 of you watching this video without subscribing or hitting the bell. Listen, the subscribed viewers and I are getting sick of your shenanigans. We beg, we deal, we extort, we cajole, and yet none of it seems to work. So consider this your final warning, unsubscribed viewers. Subscribe and hit the bell right now, or we may resort to drastic measures. Fascist Italy's ambitions on the world stage were much the same as liberal Italy's that came before it. Both plotted to expand their nation's territory and influence in the Balkans, around the Mediterranean, and down the Red Sea. Despite their revisionism and feelings of betrayal, Italian relations with its former allies of America, France, and Great Britain remained positive. Even the Soviet Union enjoyed a trade relationship with Fascist Italy. It was Greece and Yugoslavia who suffered the ire of Fascist Italy, sometimes rising to small skirmishes, such as the Corfu incident against Greece. There was really only one major nation without a positive relationship with Italy. That nation was Nazi Germany. Get out of my way! Get out of my way! There is a line, you know. I don't care. What I meant to say is, Italy. I am your biggest fan. Oh, really? Well, seriously, I've modeled everything I have after you. Ha! Well, it wouldn't be the first time Germans have copied Italians. So what did you copy exactly? Well, I'm extremely racist, hate Jews, Catholics, and the French, and I'm gonna kill every single person living east of the Vistula River. I don't really believe any of those things. Hell, the Duce's mistress and some of my cabinet ministers are Jewish. Wait, did you say racist? What do you think of Italians? Oh, that's a silly question. Half of you are subhuman. Huh. So what about me do you actually like? Your land. Can I have it? It is often forgotten that while superficially similar, fascism and National Socialism were and are two fundamentally different and incompatible ideologies. Fascists think in terms of nationhood and national supremacy, while National Socialists view the world in terms of races and the competition between them. That German National Socialists placed many Italians low on the racial totem pole did little to improve relations. One of the most remarkable differences between Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy that really highlights the differences between them was the latter's remarkable philo-Semitism, at least for most of its history. Again quoting Bosworth, by the 1930s, it is estimated that about a quarter of Italy's adult Jews belonged to the Fascist Party, well above the average membership of some 10% of Italians. The Undersecretary of the Interior, Minister of Finance in 1936, Margherita Sarfidi, patroness and lover of the Duce, were all Jewish in background. Geopolitics also drove Italy and Germany into more conflict than cooperation. Competition over Austria, a key buffer state, and Italy's German-speaking province of South Tyrol made the two nations rivals. That Austria happened to be under its own brand of fascist leadership only added an ideological dimension to the conflict. In 1934, when Austrian National Socialists murdered their fascist president in a botched coup, Italian troops were rushed to the border. Nazi Germany disavowed the attempt, but that left the Italians no less surprised to discover that they were the only power seriously opposed to the Anschluss. When it came to seeking allies, France and Great Britain were Italy's first choice. During the Great War, Italy's control over its Libyan colony receded all the way back to a few points along the coast. One of the first tasks of the new fascist government was to bring Libya back under Rome's control, a task that would only be completed in 1932. Ethiopia was the next target of fascist ambitions. Back in 1895, liberal Italy tried and failed to conquer the country. This was another stain the PNF planned to wipe off Italy's record. Budgetary concerns about the cost of invasion and occupation, weighed against the relative poverty of Abyssinia, were swept aside. An immense infrastructure effort in Italian Eritrea and Somalia was launched to supply the invasion. As 1934 drew to a close, the Italian consulate in Gondar was attacked, as Italian and Ethiopian troops stood off at the wells of Ual Ual. But Italy had no intention of acting alone. With Germany still eyeing up Austria, and the likelihood of Franco-British intervention through the League of Nations, Italy needed allies before it could act against Ethiopia. So in April of 1935, Italy founded the Stresa Front alliance between themselves, France, and Great Britain. This alliance targeted Germany by committing all three signatories to opposing any German rearmament attempts. Ethiopia was the other target of the pact, as Stresa was signed with an understanding that neither England nor France would interfere with Italy's invasion. Nazi power was checked, Austrian independence secured, and Ethiopia ripe for the taking. On October 3rd, 1935, 110,000 Italian troops invaded Ethiopia. Meticulous preparations ensured they'd enjoy good supply and heavy air support, including poison gas bombings, something against which Ethiopia had no effective defense. Unfortunately for the Italians, neither Britain nor France kept their promises. Both participated in some League of Nations sanctions, with the lost trade getting picked up by Germany. After the Ethiopians briefly pushed the Italians back in their Christmas offensive, outcry from French and British publics forced their governments to pressure Italy into a compromise peace. For the second time in under 20 years, Italy was betrayed by Britain and France. Adding insult to injury, the British then betrayed the whole Stresa Front by signing the Anglo-German Naval Agreement. The pact became truly dead when no signatory did anything to prevent German remilitarization of the Rhineland. But none of those setbacks were enough to save Ethiopia, which was defeated in February of 1937. To the surprise of many, including the Italians themselves, Italian troops acquitted themselves very well during the campaign, suffering 18,000 combat casualties and 19,000 from disease. As Italian armies fought their way through the Ethiopian highlands, Spain broke out in civil war between Franco's nationalists and the communist republicans. The Italians committed themselves to the nationalists after news arrived that France intended to send aid to the communists. German and Italian aircraft played a key role ferrying the Army of Africa into Spain. By the end of 1936, Italy committed its own military forces. 42,715 regular soldiers and 32,216 black-shirt militia before it was over. Over 3,000 would be killed and 11,000 wounded. State expenditure had to triple to fund the war, but just like in Ethiopia, Italian armies performed well, leaving Spain in the hands of a friendly regime. In December of 1937, Italy took a major step towards the Axis camp when it joined Germany and Japan, leaving the League of Nations. The Italians also resigned themselves to the Anschluss when it happened in March of 1938, a necessary precondition for an alliance with Germany. But clearly not trusting the Germans, the Italians wasted no time fortifying their new border. The Munich crisis presented another opportunity for Italy to make its influence felt, positioning itself as the prestigious mediator of the agreement. When Czechoslovakia collapsed a few months later, the Italians used the chaos to seize Albania for themselves. On April 28, 1939, Germany unilaterally renounced both the Polish-German Non-Aggression Pact of 1934 and the Anglo-German Naval Agreement from 1935. 2 weeks later, Germany and Italy joined a military alliance under the Pact of Steel. It seemed the Axis powers were almost ready for war. The only problem was that Italy wasn't prepared at all. Having exhausted itself on campaigns in Ethiopia and Spain, the nation needed at least until 1942 before it could fight again. This was made perfectly clear to the Germans, who moved forward regardless. The Germans did at least promise not to insist on the Pact of Steel, which would have obliged them to join Germany in their coming offensive wars. Germany also assented to an independent Italian invasion of Yugoslavia while the Allies were distracted. When war broke out between Germany, Poland, and the Allies on September 1st, fascist, militaristic Italy that dreamed of such a war for almost 2 decades declared its non-belligerence. As the world marched to war, Fascist Italy did nothing. Neutrality was popular among the Italian people and rulers alike. Following the quick collapse of Poland, Italy offered to mediate peace talks between Germany and the Allies, but the latter were not interested. Talks with the Germans to join their attack on France, either through the Low Countries, their own border along the Alps, or by attacks from Libya went nowhere, as did Italian consideration for attacking Yugoslavia or Greece. It was Germany's invasion of France and the Benelux that changed Italian thinking. Instead of the long-expected repeat of the First World War, German armored formations blasted through the French lines and pinned the best Allied units against the sea. With France's collapse clearly imminent, the Italians considered invading the Balkans once again, before finally settling on joining the war. So why did, on June 10, 1940, Italy enter the Second World War? It was a war the Italians neither expected nor wanted. Even their ally, Germany, was only chosen after the Stresa Front collapsed. And what did the Axis do for Italy anyway? Italy supported the German conquests of Austria, Czechoslovakia, and now almost all of North and West Europe. All the Italians had to show for it was Albania. No great prize. Now, the Italians faced the very real possibility of complete German domination of the continent. Entering the war seems like their only chance to rectify, or at least minimize the imbalance. But that assumes Italy's only options were either to remain neutral and gain nothing, or to join the war against the Allies. But it's not true that neutrality meant gaining nothing. The Allies offered Italy considerable colonial and economic concessions for their neutrality. The Germans, meanwhile, approved of separate Italian action against Yugoslavia. Like the Soviet invasions of Finland and the Baltics, it's entirely possible the Allies would have turned a blind eye to avoid making more enemies, allowing Italy to expand without fighting a world war. But such obvious gains were not good enough for the Duce, who declared such easy accomplishment of long-standing Italian goals humiliating, preferring instead to send unprepared Italian armies to attack French forces heavily dug into the Alps. Italian entry, therefore, was driven by a combination of opportunistic desire to wring gains out of the collapsing France and fears of German ascendancy. Their war goals were best summed up by Italian Foreign Minister Count Ciano. "I only need a few thousand dead to sit at the conference table as a man who fought." While they didn't know it, the Italians were stumbling into a years-long global conflict for gains uncertain even to themselves. Alia iacta est. Saluto, Commandant! Orders are in! You're to attack immediately! What? Who are we attacking? And why? British Egypt, of course! We aren't even mobilized yet. My army's sitting here at partial strength and all of our equipment's outdated. Well, orders are orders. I'm just the messenger. If we attack Greece now, with absolutely no preparation, we're all going to die. Actually, they gave me something for this. Found it! It says here, if the commander complains that all of his men will die, tell him, "Ah yes, don't be ridiculous. You're not all going to die. Only most of you." Italian war plans, what little there were based entirely on the assumption that the war was about to end. Italian units already on the French border were ordered to begin limited offensives and prepare for a general advance in case France collapsed. The goal being to win enough victories to make the other belligerents take Italy seriously and allow them into the peace talks. When the French asked for an armistice, the Italians were forced to launch their advance as early as June 21st. The poorly prepared invasion was easily beaten back. Before any progress, or more likely casualties, could be made, the armistice was signed on June 24th. This misadventure cost Italy 6,000 casualties, which was not enough to get them into the peace talks. Italian hopes for Corsica, parts of southern France, colonies in Africa, and the entire French fleet and air force were totally ignored. The Germans only gave Italy minor concessions, keeping the lion's share of spoils for themselves. Had the Italians been correct that the war was about to end, this still would have been better than nothing. Yet both Axis partners were shocked to find Britain refusing all offers of peace talks. As the Germans planned increasingly harebrained schemes to invade England, the Italians considered their options. The ever-present Balkan duo of Greece and Yugoslavia were considered. Attacking British Egypt was also an attractive possibility. Not only was it a large and valuable colony, its capture would have given the Axis control over the Suez Canal, a major blow to the British Empire, and freeing the Regia Marina from the Mediterranean. It would also allow the resupply of Italian East Africa and even the possibility of threatening India. Italian forces in Libya outnumbered the British garrison over 6-1. Yet Marshal Graziani, who commanded them, believed he was outnumbered 2-1, and that his men were insufficiently equipped. When ordered to attack, the Marshal threatened to resign, unless given more time and equipment. Even when the overstretched Rome met his supposed needs, Graziani would only delay again and demand more. East African forces, 75,000 Italian and 182,000 native troops, though admittedly with little heavy equipment, also enjoyed a massive numerical advantage in their theater. But Rome, knowing that losses in the isolated colony could not be replaced without taking the Suez Canal, ordered them to stand in place. It didn't take long before the unprepared Italian economy buckled under the strain of mobilization. The Germans experienced a similar phenomenon, so both nations began to partially demobilize their army, with Italy's demobilization scheduled for October. As 1940 dragged on, it became obvious the Germans could not invade Great Britain, and that independent Italian action was needed to bring the war to a victorious end. As they were wont to do, the Italians considered again invading Greece or Yugoslavia. Then, on September 13th, Graziani finally succumbed to pressure and launched his offensive into Egypt, taking 50 miles of worthless desert before stopping in the face of little enemy resistance. Graziani would wait until December 9th, when the British, still outnumbered 6-1, seized the initiative and launched their own offensive. In a spectacular campaign known as Operation Compass, the outnumbered British drove the Italians all the way back to Benghazi in Libya and captured 130,000 prisoners, essentially destroying Graziani's entire army. The Germans, whose offers for help had been refused for months, immediately sent troops, planes, and even a tank division to save the Italians. In January of 1941, as soon as Operation Compass completed, the British launched another offensive into East Africa from Kenya and Sudan. Additional forces landed in Italian Eritrea and occupied British Somaliland. The capital of Addis Ababa was retaken in April, Emperor Haile Selassie returned to the throne, and another 100,000 Italian soldiers captured. That the Italians still controlled half of Libya was not due to any brilliant maneuvering on their part, but thanks to another disaster they would simultaneously embroil themselves against Greece.
In victory now for the Italy, show no mercy, slaughter them like sheep. Oh no, they're fighting that oh shit, we're really good, oh shit, oh shit. Hitler only fell, but now my pants are soaked in piss.
You know, if I had a nickel for every time the Italians launched a haphazard invasion across a mountainous border for entirely reactionary reasons, I would have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird it happened twice. When Italy signed the Tripartite Pact in September of 1940, Yugoslavia and Greece were marked as exclusively Italian interests. Despite that, Italian efforts to realize those interests were stymied both by their limited strength and German diplomacy. The previous month, Italy was asked not to open new fronts in the region. This simple request led to a series of diplomatic misunderstandings that would delude Italy into making one of their most disastrous decisions of the war. Because, 2 months later, German troops were stationed in Romania. This was done to protect the Romanians, and more importantly their oil fields, from further Soviet predations, and to prepare for the invasion of Russia. However, the Germans chose not to explain this to the Italians, in whom they'd lost virtually all trust. Had the Italians just been told, they very likely would have supported, or at the very least resigned themselves to the move. Instead, Italy was left assuming that Germany was intentionally violating its promised sphere of interest. Now, they wanted to get even. In the words of Mussolini, Hitler always faces me with a fait accompli. This time, I'm going to pay him back in his own coin. He will find out from the papers that I have occupied Greece. In this way, equilibrium will be reestablished. Rome learned of Germany's move into Romania on October 12th. The next day, Mussolini ordered an invasion of Greece to be ready in 13 days. The timing could not have been worse. Winter was just setting in. Italian forces in Albania, the only viable route for invasion, needed fresh troops, new equipment, and expanded infrastructure. And, since this was happening in October, the demobilization order started taking effect, creating chaos in the Italian army. That the Bulgarians turned down an invitation to invade alongside Italy only made things harder. Naturally, this invasion, launched on October 28th, was a disaster. By November 4th, the overextended Julia division was surrounded and virtually destroyed. All progress stopped the next day. A Greek counteroffensive on the 14th drove the Italians out of Greece and 30 miles back into Albania. Continued offensives in January and February 1941 saw further marginal gains for the Greeks until they totally exhausted themselves. Only the Germans could save Italy now. So instead of an emoji for this video, leave a comment saying, "Good job, Mussolini," to congratulate Mussolini on his excellent decision to invade Greece. Good job, Mussolini. One theater where Germany could not help the Italians was in the Mediterranean. The Regia Marina was not any better prepared for war than the other branches, and suffered just as much from Italy's lack of coherent strategy. At the war's outbreak, the fleet was low on fuel, and the sailors needed training. Nonetheless, the Italian battle fleet wasn't terribly outmatched following France's exit from the war. Italian fleets could have very realistically defeated the British in the Mediterranean. Securing the sea would severely damage the British war effort and open many new opportunities for the Axis. Instead, the Regia Marina was ordered to act with caution, reduced mostly to protecting convoys to Libya and denying the central Mediterranean to British shipping. Despite that, on July 8th, an Italian fleet successfully lured a British fleet led by 3 battleships close to the Italian coast. While this Italian flotilla only had 2 battleships, the battleships Littoria and Vittoria Veneto were in port nearby. The hope was for them to join the Italian fleet and destroy the British. Unfortunately, only the Air Force got approval to participate. By the end of a brief exchange of fire, 1 Italian battleship was damaged, and the whole fleet retreated under cover of smoke. Both fleets were then attacked by the Italian Air Force from the ineffective height of 12,000 feet, leaving the Battle of Punta Silo as nothing more than a lost opportunity. Future naval engagements would only go worse for Italy. The British famously carried out a nighttime aerial torpedo attack at Taranto on the midnight of November 11th and 12th, damaging 3 battleships and 1 heavy cruiser. Even more catastrophic was the Battle of Cape Matapan on March 1941. The location of an Italian battle fleet meant to raid British shipping in the eastern Mediterranean was discovered by British Enigma decryption. In a series of engagements between the 27th and the 29th, the Regia Marina suffered 2 destroyers and 3 heavy cruisers sunk, and 1 destroyer and 1 battleship damaged. The fiasco in Greece was more than just a humiliation for the Axis. The British were quick to exploit the debacle, first by replacing Greek forces on Crete so they could fight at the front, and then, in March 1941, sending an expeditionary force into the country. These divisions were taken from North Africa, which is partly what saved the Italians from losing the rest of Libya. The Luftwaffe was sent to Albania immediately, where it not only assisted with fighting and logistics, but also successfully mined the Suez Canal from the air. But the Greek front could not be closed without the army. With impoverished Albania at its logistical capacity, German troops would have to pass through Bulgaria and Yugoslavia. Under tremendous German pressure, both nations signed on to the Tripartite Pact. German troops immediately crossed into Bulgaria from Romania. But something strange happened before they were able to enter Yugoslavia. The now pro-Axis government suddenly suffered political pressure from Great Britain and the United States, as well as its own anti-German military officers in the Air Force and Royal Guard. On March 27, 1941, those officers launched a coup with the support of the Anglos, arrested the signatories of the Tripartite Pact, exiled the Prince Regent, and replaced him with the not yet 18 Prince Peter, ending Yugoslavia's 2-day membership in the Axis. The new government didn't want to join the war on either side, which meant cooperating with either the Axis or the Allies was impossible, lest they antagonize the other. This left only the Soviet Union to purchase weapons from, and on April 6th, sign a mutual defense agreement with. Though that did them little good, since the Germans invaded the same day. Operation Strafgericht. Punishment was the combined invasion of Yugoslavia by Germany, Hungary, Italy, Bulgaria, and Croat renegades from within Yugoslavia opposed to the new Serb-dominated government. The Yugoslavs hardly stood a chance, surrendering on April 17th. Victory only cost the Germans 150 killed and 400 wounded. 300,000 prisoners were taken, and Yugoslavia was partitioned between the victorious powers. The path to Greece lay open. Operation Marita, Germany's invasion of Greece, began on April 6th. By that point, the British had only landed 2 Australian divisions, 1 New Zealand division, and an armoured brigade. A situation made even worse when on the first night of bombing, a freighter filled with explosives in Athens harbor was hit and detonated, destroying their only viable source of supply. By April 20th, the exhausted Greek army surrendered. On the 29th, the British Expeditionary Force was evacuated in a manner reminiscent of Dunkirk, once again leaving their heavy equipment behind. 218,000 Greeks and 12,000 British were captured. The Germans only suffered around 250 dead. The Greek island of Crete was not so easy to capture. The Axis had to invade it from the air on May 20th. Operation Mercury would prove more costly than either Strafgericht or Marita, costing the Germans 4,000 killed and 2,500 wounded. More than half of the men dropped. Hundreds of planes were damaged or destroyed supporting them. The Allies hardly came off much better. 3,500 casualties were taken, and 5,000 men left behind, while the Royal Navy lost 3 cruisers and 6 destroyers. It's finally time we ask ourselves, why did the Second World War go so poorly for the Italians? Again, most are quick to blame its armed forces. There exists no shortage of jokes made at their expense. After all, who could you blame for losing a war if not the men who were fighting it? But how awful were those armed forces really? Fascist Italy always considered itself a futurist country, a self-conception that extended to the armed forces. In the 1930s, a young generation of officers invented a new fascist theory of war, La Guerra Lampo, fast war. It was exactly the kind of conflict Italy was suited to. Fast, focused, one through speed, determination, and aggression. La Guerra Lampo would feature motorized infantry coordinating with light tanks to surprise and outmaneuver the enemy. 15 motorized divisions were planned for 1947. That the army did not fight its Mediterranean blitzkrieg was not due to a lack of will or imagination, but circumstance. Fighting a war so soon after the exhausting conflicts in Ethiopia and Spain left the army with little modern equipment. The army fought an old-fashioned war not because it wanted to, but because it had to. Under these circumstances, could any half-decent military have succeeded? Attacking the Alps under any circumstances was always a questionable prospect. But France seemed moments from collapsing, and Italy's leaders decided they had to get a peace or get run over. The unprepared soldiers attacking the Alps were set up for failure. That they were met by the one competent French action of the war was just bad luck. Even worse luck was that Italy's leaders miscalculated and accidentally embroiled themselves in a long war they were not prepared for. That does not, however, excuse those leaders' failures to decide on a coherent policy or strategy after this fact revealed itself. The Italians may not have had the cutting-edge fascist army their war planners fantasized, but their situation was not hopeless either. Italy still boasted a reasonably well-equipped army of over 1 million men, supported by tanks and a world-class air force and navy. Italy still could have fought a poor man's Guerra Lampo like it did in Ethiopia and Spain. It only needed to concentrate on a single front that wasn't the French Alps. In many ways, Libya was that front. Graziani was given much of what he asked for. Counterfactuals are impossible to prove. What is a fact is that Graziani was commanding forces overwhelmingly stronger than his enemy. It is entirely possible he could have won had he simply mustered up the determination to fight instead of destroying his army's morale with ceaseless delays. Even less excusable were the crushing defeats he suffered against Britain's Operation Compass, when he still outnumbered the enemy 6-1 and was the defender. Rome still deserves its share of blame for Africa. Italian East Africa could have supported an invasion of Egypt from the south. This would have both spurred Graziani forward and stretched British forces to breaking point. If successful, it would have meant capturing Suez, allowing the colony to replace its losses. Instead, the East Africa garrison was ordered to hold in place, allowing the British to seize initiative across the continent. Italy's failures in Greece fall entirely on Rome. The decision to invade on such absurdly short notice, driven entirely by diplomatic misunderstanding and wounded pride, was inexcusable. Had vast resources not been wasted on a bogus Africa campaign, the invasion given more time to prepare, and had it not been launched in the middle of a planned demobilization at the start of winter, it could have succeeded. Italy did not have to lose its Second World War, yet it practically chose to fail by failing to construct any coherent policy after the fall of France. Instead, the Italians aimlessly reacted to the circumstances around them until those circumstances exhausted and destroyed them. The responsibility for Italy's failure lay with the Italians and the Italians alone. And that's why Italy joined the Second World War and why it was such a disaster. This video was funded by the Italian General Staff to absolve them of their responsibility for the Italian army's failures, including their silliest generals, Duke Nelson, Feline Man, G.S. Rogers, Josiah, Karazin, Lord Inquisitor Zarius Dracart, Pater, Swiss Cheesus, the Raven Union, and the Union of X. And by this video sponsor, World of Tanks. The game is totally free, and new and returning players who click our link in the description get exclusive rewards. Like, comment, and subscribe for more. I'll see you in the next one.